really the opportunities for what you can do with that data have changed.
Okay, welcome back to the Marketing Playbook presented by Details Interactive. Here you'll take away 3 game-winning marketing plays every episode to take back to your team. I'm your host, Mark Friedman, and my career has been focused on direct-to-consumer marketing, direct mail, physical retail, and digital commerce. This is episode number 4, and today's guest is Tim Peterson. Tim is the Chief Marketing and Chief Digital Officer at SportsBiz. Let's open the playbook. Ready, break. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Marketing Playbook with Mark Friedman. I'm joined today by Tim Peterson. Tim's the Chief Marketing and Chief Digital Officer of SportsBiz. Welcome, Tim.
Well, thank you, Mark. It's great to be here today.
I really appreciate that you're joining me. Doing this podcast has allowed me to touch base with some folks that I knew long time ago in my career. And I forget exactly. Did you mention it was at Hanover Direct while I was there that we first came in contact?
I think it's approaching 20 years ago, Mark, while I was at Prefer Network and CMS Direct, and you were at Hanover. So it's quite a while.
Oh, yeah. I haven't heard Preferred Network. I guess they were one of the earlier cooperative alliances along with Abacus and some of the others, right?
Exactly. They were absorbed eventually up into Merkle.
Ah, okay. Gotcha. So that's how you got to Merkle. Now I got it. All right. So, as I mentioned, to you, we're hopeful that in this conversation, we're going to leave our listeners at the end with 3 key takeaways they can bring back to their business from a marketing perspective, or they can just bring back into their everyday life and how they market their own brand. So, perhaps you can give the listeners a perspective of your background, how you, where you got your start, and we'll dive in from there.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's great to be on here, by the way. I'm really happy to join you. And let me just dive in, telling you a little bit about my background. So I come at, the world of e-commerce and digital originally from a retail perspective. I was a retail salesperson and eventually a department manager, then a store manager, then a multi-unit store director. And I started my career at Bloomingdale's back in 1980 as a teenager in high school, And that was great. I absolutely loved it, had a wonderful, wonderful time. And over the years, I was a manager at Macy's, at Guess Jeans, at Pottery Barn, at Old Navy right after their founding. It really had a wonderful, wonderful ride. Simultaneous with that, I started a small business while I was in college. Turned out to be an amazing experience as well. It was really focused on desktop publishing because this is pre-internet. And I had a Apple Mac computer and I got an early laser printer for a very, very large sum of money. And I turned it into a business that lasted for about 10 years. So that's where I began.
Wow, that's interesting. And in college, you went to Yale, and we had talked about that your degree is in religious studies. So when you went to Yale and that was your major, what drove that particular interest?
I was originally a science guy. I thought I was tracking myself straight to med school. So I started off taking biology and genetics and chemistry and physics and all these sorts of things and really enjoyed it. But then I realized it wasn't going to be my career, and I decided to just take classes that were of interest to me. And I was really interested in the history of religion and philosophy of religion, the psychology of religion. So I landed there. And really the way I look back on it now is that having a really great, wide-ranging liberal arts education just prepared me for anything that I did in my career, over the decades since. It was just a great way to kind of set the stage and be open to learning over time.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the folks that I've talked to for the podcast and just in speaking to others, so often what we study in school is very, very different than what we wind up doing in our careers.
Yeah, very, very much so. I mean, I've had the pleasure of being a mentor in some programs for business students at the undergraduate and at the business school level, and they're often kind of surprised, that I wasn't really like a tech guy or a computer science guy or one of these things, because that's where my career led, is into a lot of the tech that we use today to market and sell. So it's really
Yeah.
very interesting that I just started off with something completely different.
Yeah, and that's not too different from me. I started in finance and accounting. I was an auditor for one of the big eight accounting firms, and some of our listeners are not going to know what that even means, big eight. But I did that, and then moved into marketing, which was analytical in nature. But oftentimes I still get asked the question, geez, how did you make the move from finance into marketing? But that's just a good point for people to realize that just because you're studying something doesn't mean that's ultimately where you're going to earn your living.
Absolutely.
So you talked a little bit about retail. Obviously, retail has changed quite a bit. What did you learn about yourself and perhaps the customer and the way retail worked back then? And now go fast forward all these years. Is it the same? Is it different? What's your sense?
Well, a couple things. One of the things that I think about to this day is just that person to person, human interaction, and how important it was to succeed, in retail, in the 80s and 90s, and how important it is, today to have a human, real interaction, no matter how you're selling products. So I really feel that that's something that is a major takeaway for anyone. Physical retail is different. Of course, you're in person, you're facing someone, you're in a very intimate situation. But that's what social spaces are like today. You're very intimately involved in a community, sharing all kinds of images and text and stories. It's very connected in a sense. You're talking personally in person, or you're talking personally not in person, mediated in some other way. So that's one major takeaway. And the second I would just put out there is that I really learned how to manage on the fly, I guess is a good way to put it. As a department manager and on up, retail, anything could happen, right? There was a time, there was a tornado that happened. We had a tornado warning, and I was the manager in charge of the Old Navy store when a tornado was approaching us, and I had to figure out what to do, to protect everybody and to do the right thing. And that sounds crazy, like, oh my God, it's a tornado and we're in a retail store. But I feel like just being ready for anything, in that kind of situation, prepared me to be ready for anything that happens, online or outside of a retail situation over the years, always being calm and ready to handle something that might pop up.
Right. And you read a lot about retail is dead, and then I see comments that say geez, it's really only that bad retail is dead. And I think your comment about having customer service and experience is really important. Are there retailers out there that you see either as just simply as a consumer, or in the work that you do, that you feel like are really getting it and are in fact servicing the customers?
Yeah, there are, and I know there's always room to grow. Even with stores that are doing relatively well. But I'm a big fan of places like Bonobos. They're everyone talks about them. They kind of came at it from a very, very weird angle. They still don't sell in their stores, yet it's an experience that makes you want to buy. I mean, it's very personal. They'll spend as much time with you as possible to bring you into their online world and to get you their product. So that's kind of an example from an unusual angle. However, there are people who are just great at retail altogether, and I think one of those that I've been to recently is Jonathan Adler. They're it's fascinating in a way that they're as good as they are, because they never wanted to expand their retail footprint in an enormous way. However, the experience is absolutely wonderful. The people who are there are so engaged. They're so excited about the product. They want to talk to you. They'll get you a cup of coffee and sit you down on a sofa and chat for a while. They'll ask how you found out about the brand. It really is remarkable. And then I would second mention another company sort of in that same space, kind of the home space, Restoration Hardware. I was a manager at Pottery Barn many years ago when Gary Friedman was in charge of Pottery Barn, part of the Williams-Sonoma companies. He left. He ended up taking over Restoration Hardware, turning it into what it is today. And boy, has he done a remarkable job. I mean, the restaurants, the bars, the catered, events that happen in Restoration Hardware spaces, the very unusual, vibe and unique feeling you get from their furniture and from their spaces. They've done a great job. They've carved out a whole story and a whole world that no one else really does. So those are just a couple. I mean, there are so many people I think are doing interesting things today, or moving forward in an interesting way. But I really like those two from recent visits.
Yeah, I agree with you on restoration. I was recently in their store in Palm Beach, and the restaurant was hopping, and it was such an expansive place. They clearly do events. It definitely was an experience, and a lot different than what you see in a lot of other home fashion stores. So let's move a little bit. You've characterized yourself a little bit as a data guy. Talk about the analytical side of your head, how you got into data. What your you talked about Prefer Network. That was really all around about data. Were you on the sales side at Prefer, or was it more on the analytical side?
Well, I'm glad you brought up Prefer, because it really is a great way to kind of set the stage for this. So, Prefer was, as you said, one of the early, if not the first, cooperative database taking in consumer data, largely from catalog businesses at the time, retailers, and it was relatively early e-commerce era, right? So it's tons of purchasing data down to the item level for a transaction. I was one of the first 5 people in Prefer, hired there when it was a startup in 2000. I think there were about 70 people after its final merging into Merkle. It was a really wonderful ride. I started off in client service and sales. I was really just working, those both sides of the coin, trying to bring clients in and trying to make sure they were happy. I did move over to the data side, though. I ended up being in charge of the cooperative database. I was their first chief privacy officer. I tried to figure out really what we had to deal with, in order to bring the data in the right way, mix it up in the right way, and then work with all of the the number crunchers, the data scientists, the modelers, everybody who we needed to get things out that were useful to clients, whether there were lists or reports or what have you. So it was a great learning experience for me. And after that, I ended up going to Nature's Bounty, the giant CPG player in vitamins and supplements, and I was their head of business intelligence, their first actually head of business intelligence, and so helped really establish their approach there. Really took it from there. So I ended up starting in a different place, learning a tremendous amount over a period of 7 years at a great startup, and then moved over to a much more established CPG player as a head of BI, and really have kept that data in the background, let's say, for just about everything I've done since.
I'm drawing a blank. I can see the face of the founder of Prefer. What was his name? Platt?
Doug Platt and Sidney Herman.
Doug,
Those were the two
Doug
founders.
Doug Platt. That's it. As soon as you started, I asked the question. I could think of his last name. Boy, I haven't heard that in a long time. So
Doug is
yeah, that
happily in Italy right now, happily working and living in Italy for years, and we keep in touch a little bit still. He's a remarkable guy.
Yeah, that's great. And so, data has changed in some ways. Data has changed, I guess, and in some ways it hasn't. Talk about that. What are you seeing that's different about the data we capture, how we use the data to help drive sales?
Well, a couple very obvious things I think that people will just know, even if they're not deeply involved in data, is that there's a lot more of it than there used to be. I think that's a number one on the list. There's just so much of it. Number two is that it's coming from a lot of sources that didn't exist, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years ago. You might have had a mailing list, or a file from a call center, or a variety of things that are pretty understandable, and then product files and transaction histories that were pretty easy to wade through. Not today, it really could be anything. It could be transaction records, that are contactless payment. It could be, different kinds of things that you're getting from, how shipping is done, how you're tracking a product and where it's coming from, where it's being delivered, the sourcing of products. People are very interested in understanding where materials are coming from, and you're bringing that data into play. And of course, all of the social media, all of the different things that you now have connected to a website, and I'm putting that in quotes because it's much more than a site today. But really, the way it's changed is the amount of data, the number of the sources of data, and the new places that data is coming from. And then last, I would say, just again, a very surface level, but big thing is really the opportunities for what you can do with that data have changed. Because there's so much more and it's coming from more sources, you have a lot more people sitting there saying, well, what do we do with voice activated ordering, now that we have data on X, Y, and Z and how people behave? Or what do we do with image recognition or sentiment monitoring, or these categories that didn't exist when I started in data 20 years ago?
Yeah, lots of things have had changed in that 20 years, and I know it's funny because when I was building databases back in some of the multi-title brands that I was in, the tech guys would say, well, what do you want us to capture? And I said, geez, I'm a marketing guy. I want you to capture everything. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I want you to capture everything. And it feels like there's still a lot of that. And that the real, where the rubber meets the road is, how do you take that data, organize it in a way that makes it management actionable? And I think that, there's still a lot of struggle around that.
Well, I think there is a lot of struggle around it. And like the last couple businesses I've been involved in, and some startups that I've advised, are really in the middle of that. I mean, they are, platforms, let's say, because, that's a term that we like using today, to really make sense of all of the things we just talked about, data from different sources, and, vast amounts of it. So what do? You try to look for patterns in the data. You're scoring, you're modeling, you're saying, green for go for anything that has these characteristics, and yellow for caution for anything that has these characteristics, and red for stop, something's wrong for anything with these characteristics. So at Via, that's a lot of what we do, is we try to bring in data for a bunch of different clients, and really see how we can simplify in a way, and score and give the red, yellow, green. And it's very similar over at SportsBiz. Now that I'm CMO and Chief Digital Officer of this great startup, they're taking in sport related data, but it's data that's it's unheard of, I think, 10 or 15 years ago, how much of it there is. It's data on athletes, teams, leagues, associations, venues, and events, and all of these advertisers and sponsors connected to sports. And really, I think we have, I may be wrong in this exact number, but I think it's like 200 sources of data, that we're looking at, pulling in for our work, at the SportsBiz platform. It's just really remarkable.
Yeah, I'll come back to sports biz because I have a bunch of questions. As a sports person, a big sports guy, I have tons of questions about that and what you're doing. It just seems so
Sure.
interesting, but I'll come back to that. One of the things that I've heard in the conversations with you, you seem to be, really flexible, really open to new things and examining new things. How important is that to you personally, and should it be to people that are listening?
Well, I'm going to tell our listeners, if they're taking notes, that they should put number one on their page, and they should write down, be flexible. I think this is one of the key takeaways for me in my career, and I love passing this on to other people. If I had been more set in my ways, or followed a very safe path, I'm not sure exactly where I would be today. I mean, I had a very successful pre-internet desktop publishing business that was great. But mostly I was printing resumes on a laser printer. I was doing some graphic design, and I made some annual reports, and it had a certain life to it, but it was pre-internet, right? So I had to be open to what was going on. So as the 90s, went from the mid 90s to the late 90s, and the world started to change, I said, well, wait a minute, what do I do? And how do I fit in here? And I was still a retail boss in, a number of places. The last place I worked in retail was a home store on Long Island called Peter Andrews. And I was their store director, 3 locations, a warehouse, all the stuff. But then it was late 90s. The internet was becoming a thing. People were starting to look at selling there. And I got invited into a startup. And I decided to just take a leap and say, okay, this may be the future. It may not. But I've got this other experience, and why don't I try to apply it? So I was very briefly at a startup called giftmenu.com. I was employee number 1, and the tech got sold, very quickly because it was great tech. But I said, well, wait a minute, do I go back to retail, or do I go toward what I thought was the future? And from that period on, I went to a lot of e-commerce and digital related roles, over the years. So that's the flexibility piece here, is that I really just said, you got to be open to new things. And I continue to be open. I want to know how voice activated ordering works. I want to know how sentiment monitoring works. All of these things that people talk about, I dig in there and I want to know.
Well, when you figure it all out, will you come back and be a guest and explain it to everybody again?
I would be happy to.
You've had quite a bit of consulting throughout your career, and one of the things that I thought was interesting that you've worked on are site evaluations and replatforming. And I've spent a bunch of time running e-commerce businesses where we had to choose a new e-commerce platform. Is it a build or buy? Talk a little bit about how you've seen the e-commerce platform space change, perhaps over the last 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's been very dramatic. I think that, and this is fair to say, I think about 10 years ago, even though, the smartphone had been out, when did it come out? Like 2008 or something like that, the big revolution with the iPhone, people weren't quite sure how e-commerce was going to work, connected to the birth of the smartphone, the iPhone. No one was really sure. So the platform, back then was focused on optimizing for a desktop, environment, and for a limited number of browsers, and for, a very specific set of activities that people would do. And also you have to think about 10 years ago, well, what were the other options for search outside of, Google and a couple other search engines? Really, were there other options? And even though Amazon existed, and even though the iPhone existed 10 years ago, they didn't really factor, I think it's a fair thing to say, they didn't factor very much into the success of an e-commerce site and how you would evaluate it and how you would platform it and whatnot. Today, you keep leaping. I usually tell people that you have to think in like 3-year chunks now, like 3-year, what is happening now versus what might be happening in 3 years. It's not the 5-year window or the 10-year window anymore. It's really much tighter, more like 3. So when you think about it in those sorts of chunks, you had the birth and the explosion of all of these different social media sites, which changed how we related to our phones. And then the idea of social selling, and then the explosion of the marketplace on Amazon and people searching for product on Amazon as opposed to just searching on Google. All of these different things and more, many more things, happen. So what happens with e-commerce today? I mean, e-commerce today has to, factor in it's mobile, first, if not only, because obviously for some players, or maybe not obviously for a listener, but some players really only look at mobile. And then if anything happens outside of it for their e-commerce, well, that's great, but they'll just focus on mobile. But really, that's how the world has changed. It's like you've gone in these leaps from a desktop world with a very limited way of viewing how things are going to work and be connected in, and very limited options and players and factors to consider, to today where it is an explosion of marketplaces and social selling and selling through things like WhatsApp and TikTok and on and on and on. It's just an extraordinary moment where you have to think of all of that when you're trying to sell online today.
Yeah, and as I see more and more businesses, I mean, this is the standard now. We've got this conundrum. You're a retailer. Your desktop conversion rate or your traffic, may have been 50%. Maybe you were or 60%. Maybe you were 60% desktop and 40% mobile. Many businesses have now totally shifted around where more of their traffic is mobile. The conversion rate is almost always substantially lower on mobile rates or here on mobile. So now you've got this challenge of all this traffic, not really because you're doing anything, it's just organically moving. You've got all these conversion rates substantially lower on mobile, average order and transaction usually lower on mobile. So it's a real challenge for a lot of retailers.
Well, let me just add one thing that, again, you and the listeners might find a little interesting. I'm a big fan of retail and commerce history. And I had a discussion a while ago with somebody who's kind of an expert on Macy's and a few other big old time players. And they had this analogy that I thought was great. I said, when they built the massive Macy's Herald Square store in New York, and that took years. It's a gigantic thing if people haven't been through it. And there were additions over decades. But it's like a city block. It's an enormous place. But one of their big innovations was introducing the escalator into retail, right? And so what does that mean? So here's what happened. When they introduced the escalator, people were coming in at a higher rate and higher numbers to new places to shop, and they had to learn how to redo selling, right? I mean, so the analogy, of course, was this was very similar to moving from desktop to mobile selling to marketplaces and all of this, because people are streaming in from a different angle, from a different way. They're getting to new product and different product. And at that point, of course, there were just physical sellers, on the floor, but they had to reposition merchandise and reallocate time and all this sort of stuff in ways that are documented. Historians can look at this and say, well, what happened in selling in 1903 versus selling in 1904 when they added the escalators? And things are very different. The same when they installed elevators in major department stores and whatnot. So it sounds almost silly, but really it's not new, to have to be open to these changes and to figure things out. You just have to keep going with whatever the new tech is and whatever consumers are doing.
Yeah, you talk about escalator in my mind in Herald Square. My mind immediately goes to walking that store with my grandparents and the escalator going down from the main level to the cellar that they had was made out of wood. The slats on the escalator itself were wooden; they weren't steel. And I remember always wanting to go on there with my grandmother, and the benefit of going down to the cellar was where they sold the candy. So that was always a fun experience.
Well, that was a marketing ploy, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're aware of that history, it was a marketing ploy. They decided to put food down and to call it the cellar, as opposed to calling it like the bargain basement or whatever. Just put merchandise down there because people went up but didn't go down.
Yeah.
And so they reinvented that space and made it more exciting and made it a better experience.
The devil's in the details. You've probably heard that phrase time and time again in your professional life. Projects get started with great intentions, but you no longer have the time to pay attention to the little things that could be the difference between success and failure. At Details Interactive, you can discuss your business with a seasoned direct-to-consumer marketing executive who's helped launch and grow web businesses and integrate multi-channel marketing initiatives. Learn more at detailsinteractive.com.
All right, so let's talk about SportsBiz. So, as I mentioned, I'm a interested sports guy. I think what you're doing is very intriguing. So tell us what SportsBiz is all about.
So SportsBiz is coming at a problem. So the founders of the company are a bunch of folks who've been involved in sports in one way or another for years. A sports agent, an owner of a NASCAR team, someone who's the founder of a National Lacrosse League, on and on. People involved in sports from one angle or another. the core problem that they identified is that people don't really understand yet in sports how sponsorship dollars really work for the brand, right? How do they really work? Like, how are you understanding the return on the investment, the ROI of a multi-million dollar, stadium naming rights deal? Or how are you understanding the value of a sponsorship of the US Open for tennis, where Chase has its logo, against the back, of every view of every match, they're right there. Or Ralph Lauren sponsoring the Olympics, right? And again, providing uniforms at great expense. And, so what happened is that people who are in the weeds with all of this said, we get some data, but we don't get a lot of data. And we get, some insight, but we don't get a lot of insight. And given how much more data there is and how many more tools there are and how many ways in which consumers, connect today, how come in sports, there really is no great way to understand that $60 million that Procter & Gamble may have spent last year, or $100 million it may have spent across all athletes, teams, leagues, associations, or venues or events. I mean, how do you figure it out? So coming from that perspective, for the last year and a half, there's been a team of people pulling data sources together, signing agreements, and building a tool, that's in the form of a platform that we're calling Deep Sport. And essentially the tool is focusing on areas like matching athletes to brands, or just taking things that are at a basic level and say, well, wait a minute, our data shows that of the 43,000 athletes we have in our database, because I think that's the number now, of the 43,000 athletes in the database, which of these are, do we have verifiable data about what they're earning, how, what they're doing for different brands, what categories of sponsorship they have, is it food, is it sneakers, is it travel, whatever. And then we work with other data and try to figure out, let's say, for Lexus, for a car brand, or for, as I said, like Procter & Gamble, or for a bank like Chase, what really makes sense for them? Where are the gaps? And we keep building and building this data. And then we've got teams of data scientists who have written proprietary algorithms to run through these large data sets to say, okay, when Serena Williams was playing versus Coco Gauff or what have you in a match at the US Open, then what was going on social media at that time? Which of the sponsors, behind Serena were getting any traction right then, right? We can match the data minute by minute. What was being seen on screen when she won, or when Coco won, right? How much time was the logo being seen on screen on which networks and for how long, right? On and on and on. So it's the layering of all of this data in ways that, as an individual brand, an individual sponsor, they wouldn't have access to this. We're bringing it all together. We're getting, these clients in, and we're saying, okay, now what are you doing? And bring us your data, and we're going to figure it all out together. The answer may be, for some, they shouldn't be doing some things, and they should look at other options, and the answer for others is going to be, wow, you really hit the ball out of the park here, no pun intended, hit the ball out of the park here, with these sponsorships, because it shows us that you've gained like, 40 million or 50 million or $70 million in value from this $20 million investment, right? That's basically what SportsBiz is up to right now.
And so what's the revenue model for SportsBiz? Is it a SaaS platform? Is it a consultative kind of a business?
It's a SaaS platform with licenses that begin, and I think it's fair to say this, we're launching officially later this year, but it should be $24,000 a year is the base license model, is what we're looking at right now. And there will be, custom modeling and different types of reports, other things that we will be open to with our clients, but really it's meant to be a SaaS model, like a very rich platform with lots and lots of data. And, we're going to be fully engaged with each of these clients, anyone who's a sponsor in sports, period. That's who we're looking for as clients. And that's really what the model is going to be.
All right. So in some sense, you're not really disrupting because it doesn't sound like there's, much out there already other than, kind of I have this impression that each of the sponsors are evaluating pretty much, I guess, with some similarity, but they're all pulling data together differently. They're interpreting the data differently, right? Is there somebody else that's helping them in this area?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fair way to put this, because I try to be completely open about this, even though I'm an inside guy there. My view is that it is disruptive, and I'll explain how. But I think part of the win is that there has been no one that we can tell or that we're aware of who has pulled together all of these sources of data, and that it's not possible for each of these clients, each of these brands, whoever they are, to have pulled together the data themselves. So just the access to it all right now, what they have are multiple relationships with piecemeal approaches to pulling in the data, and they have their internal teams trying to figure out how to make sense of it. So we're saying, why don't you stop that? Try this. We're pulling it all together, and we'll see if we can make this happen together and make it worth it. The way I'll just add this is that way we are disruptive is that there are angles to this that are unexpected, I think, to some. For example, we're looking at esports, right? And we're looking at the growth in sports betting now that that is legal. I mean, so a whole variety of things that a lot of these brands have not traditionally done or haven't explored yet, right? So we are pulling in that data in anticipation of them making major shifts, right? So you might have heard in the news, Atari, the game maker, very famous, been around for many, many years. They're opening up a chain of hotels, right? So that's fascinating in its own way. But think about what's going to happen at those hotels. There are going to be these exclusive games and competitions and all different kinds of sponsorship opportunities now in a physical space that is not a stadium, right? But is involved with esports, right? So it's a completely different angle that nobody had the opportunity to be a part of until now, right? So you have esports, you have a hotel, and you have all of these sponsors who are scratching their heads saying, wait a minute, would this make any sense and how does it work? Well, we're trying to get ahead of that. That's how we're partially being disruptive, is saying, well, do this. Here's something completely different.
Yeah, that's incredible. You said Atari. I thought asteroids, because that was
There you go.
that was the game. Yeah, that's all these old memories you're bringing back for me, Tim. Wooden slats on escalators
Yep.
and asteroids and big 8 accounting firms. That's crazy. You mentioned earlier Amazon marketplaces. Do you have a take on that? Being an old-time retailer and how they have obviously disrupted the way we do our shopping?
Well, I'm coming at this from, again, like a lot of consumers, from a couple different angles. First of all, I admit I am a fan of Amazon, right? I just admit it, and it's tough to admit that in some of the relationships I've had with clients in recent years, because, they're fighting against Amazon, or it's something that, is really fraught, to use a crazy word. It's fraught. There's like this weird relationship there. But the way I look at it is, Amazon's not going anywhere, right? They're there. So we have to address it in a very sensible, real life way. And for a lot of brands, that means you do need to be on Amazon and you do need to sell there. Doesn't mean you need to put, 100% of everything that you do on Amazon. However, you need to have a presence. If people are searching there, at a higher rate than they're searching on Google, and there is data that shows that, depending on exactly what's being searched for and when, then that's something you have to contend with. So what does that mean? It means that you would have a shop on Amazon, you could work with other sellers and sell on Amazon, but maybe you have special flavors if you're a food, or special formulations if you're a supplement, or different unique experiences if you also have a retail presence that bring people outside of the world of Amazon into your particular world. You have to have a value add, right? I think that's kind of the bottom line, is that You got to recognize that Amazon is there, that they're not going away, that there may be a way to expand your reach and bring in that revenue, even with all of the other expenses that are tied in with bringing like a major seller there. But it also means that you have to work very hard in having something unique and exciting happening outside of Amazon to attract people to you. And there are a lot of brands that do it well. I've talked with a lot of people over the recent years who are able to pull that off.
Yeah, unique and exciting. That's the thing. And whether it's just in Amazon or marketplaces, even if it's in physical retail or online, the unique and the innovative and the different things that help you to set yourself apart from others are really important. And, frankly, I think that goes to just your own personal brand. How do you set yourself apart from the tons of really talented people that are out in the market? So interesting points. So we're getting down to almost the end of our time together. As part of the marketing playbook, and keeping with the theme here of sports, we do something at the end of each of the shows called the 2-minute drill, where I'll ask a couple of questions, and actually it's 7 questions, and get your quick and dirty response. And if you're up for it, I'll start with the questions.
I'm ready. I'm ready. Go for it.
Okay, so the first one is a brand that you would admire or that inspires you.
Okay, I'm going to give you one that a lot of people haven't heard of, but KD New York, not DKNY, but KDNY. They are a remarkable company that started off doing ballet wear. Then they did yoga wear. They do a lot of quote unquote athleisure. But their big breakaway right now is that they are doing vegetable cashmere. So it's fabric that is soft and resilient and washable and sustainable and environmentally amazing, and it's based on soy. It's made of soy. It's not made from goats. So it's a type of cashmere that people should really check out, and they have a wonderful line of products, KD New York. I love that brand.
Interesting. Haven't heard of that one. Thank you. What's the favorite app on your telephone?
This is one that bores some people, but I'm going to say it for my own reasons. Starbucks is my favorite app on my phone. I probably have, I have an iPhone like many of you listening, and I probably have 10 screens worth of apps because I test all sorts of things out. But there's no app I use more than I use Starbucks. And it also continues to surprise and delight me. I mean, it gives me different offers. It gives me different games. I'm always getting, recommendations. I connect it to my Spotify and I'm downloading music. They've been able to create an experience for me that really works. And it's amazing to me that they've done such an amazing job. I use it to pay, and I listen to music and all of these other things that I mentioned. So they've done a great job, and I continue to applaud them.
Great. The last website other than Amazon that you shopped from?
I shop a lot. I'm a crazy shopper. I do a lot of shopping, but I was at Target before Amazon. Other than Amazon, the last day or two, I bought some toys for kids. They were great prices, really wonderful stuff, great selection. In fact, I think the Lego products were unique to Target as well. So I really enjoyed shopping with them.
Something that you're not good at, but you wish that you were?
I have tried to be a singer. Like when I was a kid, I wanted to sing. And when I was in college, I tried to be in singing groups, and I tried to be in a band. I'm not a good singer, but I really enjoy trying. So if you catch me at a karaoke bar, I will attempt to sing, but I really wish I were a good singer. That would make me a lot happier.
All right, we'll press the mute button then. A charitable organization that you are passionate about?
I am a longtime board member and treasurer now of a group called Printed Matter. Printed Matter has been around for over 40 years. It's a New York City art charity. We help young artists and mid-career and any type of artists really create work that is widely available. Started off with printed work like zines and books and whatnot, but really it is very wide-ranging. We have amazing activities, amazing support in the art world, and we have 2 giant events every year in New York and LA that attract, last year the one in New York attracted 40,000 people to MoMA's branch out in Queens for our event. So we have a great time and really love supporting art and artists. It's Printed Matter.
Good for you. If you had one superpower, what would it be?
I love this. It's almost like an interview question too. I like saying all knowing, I really like that idea because really I feel like it beats out so many other things. Like I could be strong, but maybe that's not the most important thing, or I could be invisible, but then maybe that's not the most important. But if I'm all knowing, I know everything that's going on. I could figure out anything I need to. So for me, the superpower would be to be the, I guess, omniscient. I guess that's the word. Be an all-knowing being.
Yep. And the last one, other than family, what's your most prized possession?
Really, my husband and I love art, and we have a lot of it. And we have really supported artists personally over the years and followed a lot of artists and movements. And it's been a lot of fun. You just can open up your eyes in a new way about the world around you with great art. So for me, the prized possessions are kind of the art we have as a whole. But there are some individual pieces that are just absolutely amazing. We're so happy to have around us. But really, I would say art is the most prized thing that I have outside of family.
Well, this was really great, Tim. You have such a vast array of experience and wide interests, and I think you've done exactly what we've asked of our guests to be able to give some takeaways that people can take back into their businesses or use in their personal life. So I really appreciate you being with us. If people want to reach out and connect with you, where can they find you on social media?
It's on LinkedIn is the best. It's Timothy J. Peterson. There are many, many Timothy Petersons, many, many. So Timothy, initial J, Peterson on LinkedIn, and you will find me. That is the best way, I think, to connect. Mark, it's been great talking with you here today. I've had a blast. Really enjoyed this.
All right. Well, thanks very much. We'll catch up down the road. Appreciate it. You have a nice day.
Thanks. You too. Take care.
That's it. Today's game ball goes to Tim Peterson for coming on the Marketing Playbook. To me, today's 3 game-winning marketing plays were as follows. Number 1, data, data, data. There's more of it than ever before, but be judicious in what you collect. Be certain that you're not only capturing, but also giving your staff the tools to make the data management actionable. Number 2, flexibility is critical, not only with your day-to-day work, but also in your career. Where you start's not always where you'll end. Be flexible enough to enjoy the ride. And number 3, be positive. The right attitude can sometimes make up for a lack of knowledge. Thank you, Playbook marketers, for listening to another episode. If you want to check out more pages of the Marketing Playbook, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast spot and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. You can also follow us on Twitter at DetailsInteract and learn more at detailsinteractive.com. Until next time, the devil is in the details.